A soldier's letter home, read over the black and white image of a young man, barely out of his teens. A helicopter's silhouette against a blood-orange sunset. The haunting, dissonant chords of a Trent Reznor score. This isn't just history. This is memory. This is pain. And this is the story of the Vietnam War. The 2017 masterpiece by Ken Burns and Lynn Novick. For 10 episodes and 18 hours, it plunges us into one of the most divisive, traumatic, and misunderstood conflicts in modern history. Forget what you think you know. This documentary rewrites the narrative, not by taking a side, but by embracing every side, every voice, every ghost of that long and bitter war. How did they achieve this monumental feat? And what does it teach us, decades later, about who we were and who we are now? Let's find out. The story of Vietnam doesn't begin with American boots on the ground. It begins decades earlier, in the embers of French colonialism. For a century, Vietnam fought for its independence. After World War II, that fight was led by Ho Chi Minh, a nationalist and a communist. The French were defeated in 1954, and the country was partitioned, a communist north and a non-communist south. America, caught in the grip of the Cold War and the domino theory, feared a communist takeover of Southeast Asia. So it began to send advisors, then money, then weapons, to prop up the fragile South Vietnamese government. What started as a trickle of support soon became a flood. By the mid-1960s, under President Lyndon B. Johnson, America's involvement escalated dramatically. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, whether real or exaggerated, gave the green light for full-scale military intervention. Hundreds of thousands of American troops, mostly young draftees, were sent into the jungles and rice paddies of a country they barely understood. They fought a war with no clear front lines, against an elusive and determined enemy, the Viet Cong in the South and the North Vietnamese Army. The strategy was attrition. Body counts were the measure of success. The war was broadcast into American living rooms every night. The first television war, showing the brutal reality of combat, the napalm, the search and destroy missions, and the ever-growing casualty lists. What makes Burns and Novick's documentary so groundbreaking is its radical empathy. They spent 10 years on this project, understanding that there was no single truth to the Vietnam War, only a collection of deeply personal, often conflicting truths. They didn't just interview American generals and politicians. They found the foot soldiers, the nurses, the POWs, and crucially, for the first time on such a scale, they gave equal weight to the Vietnamese perspective. We hear from North Vietnamese soldiers who spent years on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and from South Vietnamese civilians whose lives were torn apart by a civil war fueled by foreign powers. This multifaceted approach reveals the profound moral ambiguity of the conflict. As one American veteran, John Musgrave, powerfully recounts in the film, the Vietnam War drove a stake right through the heart of America. It was the first time that we had been confronted with the fact that we might not be the good guys. The documentary is filled with these raw, unfiltered moments of testimony. People on all sides confess their fears, their regrets, and the acts of both heroism and brutality they witnessed and sometimes participated in. The filmmakers masterfully weave these interviews with breathtaking archival footage, much of it never seen before, and a soundtrack that blends iconic 1960s rock with a haunting original score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. The music doesn't just accompany the images, it becomes the emotional heartbeat of the story. The documentary dissects the major turning points with incredible detail. The Tet Offensive of 1968, a massive surprise attack by the North, was a military disaster for them. But politically, it was a stunning victory. It shattered the illusion in America that the war was being won, that there was light at the end of the tunnel. Trust in the government evaporated. The anti-war movement, once a fringe protest, exploded into a mainstream force, dividing families and communities. College campuses became battlegrounds of dissent. The footage from this era is a whirlwind of chaos. Riots at the Democratic National Convention, impassioned speeches, and young people challenging the very foundations of American authority. The film forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about leadership. We listen to secretly recorded White House tapes where presidents from Kennedy to Johnson to Nixon confessed their private doubts about the war, even as they publicly escalated it, sending more young men to die for a cause they weren't sure was winnable or even right. Nixon's promise of peace with honor led to years more of brutal fighting, the secret bombing of Cambodia, and ultimately a withdrawal that felt less like peace and more like defeat. We hear a former South Vietnamese soldier lament, "They had a plan to win the war, but they never had a plan to win the peace." This single quote captures the tragedy of America's strategy. The final fall of Saigon in 1975 is depicted not as a moment of victory or defeat, but as one of pure human desperation. The images are unforgettable. Helicopters frantically evacuating people from the roof of the U.S. Embassy, South Vietnamese allies clinging to the gates, begging for a way out. For America, the war was over. For the Vietnamese, a new chapter of suffering was just beginning, with re-education camps and a devastated country to rebuild. The final shot is not of a battle, but of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. A black scar in the earth, reflecting the faces of those who come to touch the names of the dead. So why does this documentary matter so much all these years later? Because it isn't just about Vietnam. It's about how nations go to war based on fear, arrogance, and political calculation. It's about the chasm that can open up between the government and its people, between soldiers and civilians. It is a masterclass in how history should be told, not as a simple story of good versus evil, but as a complex, messy, and deeply human affair. As the narrator states, America's long and bitter war in Vietnam was a tragedy of epic dimensions. It was begun in good faith by decent people, out of fateful misunderstandings, American overconfidence, and Cold War miscalculation. In an age of deep political division, the Vietnam War is a powerful reminder of the importance of listening, of seeking out different perspectives, of acknowledging shared humanity, even with our enemies. The lessons of Vietnam are not about left or right, hawk or dove. They are about the catastrophic cost of lies, the corrosive effect of division, and the slow, painful process of healing and reconciliation. The documentary doesn't offer easy answers, because there aren't any. Instead, it offers understanding. It forces us to look into the abyss of our own history, and in doing so, helps us better understand the world we live in today. It's a difficult watch, but an essential one. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into one of the greatest documentaries ever made. If you've seen it, what part moved you the most? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this analysis, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more content. See you next time.